Imagine standing in a quiet Assamese village on a foggy night, when suddenly birds begin falling from the sky. For decades, Jatinga has been called the bird suicide village, but the real explanation may be even stranger. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive headfirst into one of the most truly bizarre natural mysteries out there. We're talking a wild mix of local folklore, tricky geography, and some deeply complex science to figure out what is actually happening in the skies above Assam.
So, the giant question hanging over us today is, why exactly did Jatinga get stuck with a name like the Bird Suicide Village? Well, for over a century, this little, picturesque spot in India's Hasso district was just totally shrouded in these chilling rumors. I mean, think about the sheer terror for the people living there back in the day. You'd hear dark tales of mass Evian suicide, evil spirits dropping from the heavens, and demonic forces swarming the ridge at night. But as we start unpacking the clues, you're going to see that the actual science behind this is, honestly, way more fascinating than any ghost story.
To really get this mystery, we have to rewind and look at the human side of the story. Picture this, it's 1890. The Nagas, the original folks living there, see this terrifying bird shower happen firsthand. They were so convinced these falling birds were literal demons from the sky that they actually just packed up and abandoned the entire village. Gone. Fast forward a bit to 1905, and the Jaintia people move in. They're out at night looking for stray cattle with burning bamboo torches, and boom, they experienced the same terrifying bird shower. But they took a totally different view, interpreting it as this gift of God, falling right into their laps to be harvested. Things kind of stayed that way until 1957, when a British tea planter and naturalist named EPG finally put Jatinga on the map, turning this spooky local legend into a massive global puzzle that scientists just had to crack.
Okay, let's look at the clues, because the weather conditions required for this to happen are crazy specific. It's almost eerie. This doesn't just happen on any random Tuesday. It strictly goes down during the late monsoon months. We're talking September to November. And the timing? Literally only between 6 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. But wait, it gets weirder. The atmospheric conditions have to be absolutely perfect. Total moonless night, super dense fog, a light, annoying drizzle. And the wind must be blowing relentlessly from the southwest. If even one of those things is off, like if the wind just shifts a little or there's a tiny sliver of moonlight, nothing happens. The sky stays totally empty. Now, this highly specific weather trap actually ties perfectly into the town's name. Jatinga is a Zamay Naga word that literally translates to pathway of rain and water. How wild is that? That's a massive linguistic clue right there. It tells us that the unique geography and the crazy atmospheric anomalies aren't just random. This village sits dead center in the pathway of intense, concentrated monsoon weather. It's the absolute perfect storm baked right into the village's identity.
But here is what's truly mind-boggling, the sheer geographical precision of this whole thing. You'd think if bad weather was knocking birds out of the sky, it would happen all over these massive mountains, right? No way. This phenomenon strictly targets a tiny, highly specific strip of land right on the Jatinga Ridge. We are talking about a geographical funnel that's exactly 1.5 kilometers long and just 200 meters wide. That's it. It is incredibly localized. Villagers could set up their lights just a few hundred meters outside this little pocket and absolutely nothing would happen. It's basically one of the tightest, most specific geographical traps in all of nature.
So to crack a case this specific, you need to bring in the heavy hitters. After EPG sounded the alarm, the legendary Indian ornithologist Dr. Salim Ali personally showed up to investigate the ridge. Later, experts from the Zoological Survey of India camped out for entire monsoon seasons, just braving the absolute worst rain and wind. They realized pretty quickly that they weren't dealing with a curse or some supernatural event. They were looking at a highly complex biological and meteorological puzzle. They had to systematically rule out the impossible to find out what was really going on.
So what were our scientific detectives actually looking for? Well, they essentially had three main suspects. Suspect number one, just a brutal physical combo of high-velocity winds and dense fog violently disorienting the birds mid-flight. Suspect number two, flooded habitats. They noticed that during the massive 1988 floods, there was a huge spike in birds falling at Jatinga, which suggested the birds were literally being flushed out of their normal homes by rising water. And finally, suspect number three, which is kind of wild, geomagnetic anomalies. Jatinga sits right near some converging geological fault lines. Some experts thought that this highly charged, foggy atmosphere might actually be scrambling the magnetic lobes in the birds' brains, basically destroying their internal GPS.
When we put the unique terrain and the extreme weather together, we get a step-by-step scientific explanation that experts call the funnel effect. Let's walk through it together. Step 1. High-velocity southwesterly winds aggressively channel through this rare, narrow gap in the steep boreal mountain range. Step 2. That violent wind shakes up the local birds while they're trying to sleep in their roosts. Step 3. Fleeing that crazy wind, they get pushed right into the Jatinga Valley, where thick, trapped fog causes severe disorientation. They are completely lost in the mist. And finally, step 4. Panicked, dazed, and totally exhausted, these birds spot the artificial lights of the village, which historically used to be torches, and they fly desperately toward them, just hoping for a safe place to land.
And right here is where we absolutely need to bust the biggest myth of this entire story. The dramatic rumor out there is that migratory birds intentionally fly to Jatinga from miles and miles away just to commit mass suicide. But the scientific fact? It's completely different, and honestly, a lot more tragic. These birds are absolutely not trying to die. They're just totally dazed, exhausted, and completely blinded by extreme weather. Historically, when these poor, confused birds fluttered down toward the village lights seeking safety, they didn't commit suicide. They were struck down and captured by villagers using long bamboo poles to be used as food.
That tragedy makes even more sense when we look at the actual victims here. These aren't long-distance international travelers. The birds getting caught up in this are primarily resident juvenile birds. We're talking local species like the Indian pitta, the tiger bitter, and various local kingfishers. Basically, they're young, inexperienced birds, kind of like teenagers, living in the adjacent valleys who just make a wrong turn into a deadly, localized weather trap. It completely shatters that whole dramatic global death wish theory, bringing the mystery right down to local ecology and just how vulnerable young wildlife can be.
Once everyone finally understood the real truth behind this, it was a total game changer for Jatinga. Researchers figured out that changing the motivation and awareness of the villagers was really the most practical solution. Once the Forest Department and conservation groups realized this was just severe weather disorientation combined with opportunistic hunting, they jumped into action. And they didn't just point fingers either. They started these massive, empathetic community awareness campaigns. They built watchtowers with special deflective lights to safely guide the confused birds away from people's homes, and they worked directly with the locals to end those traditional hunting practices, completely shifting how the village interacted with the sky above them.
And this perfectly illustrates how a community can just completely evolve. They took a really tragic misunderstanding and turned it into something amazing. Today, instead of this deadly harvest, the village actually hosts the International Jatinga Festival. The community now uses this wild, unique weather anomaly to promote ecotourism, bird watching, and serious conservation. So instead of waiting in the dark with bamboo poles, locals and tourists are out there with binoculars and cameras, safely witnessing the phenomenon. It's just a massive, incredibly positive shift from hunting to preservation, totally proving that education and economics can team up to save wildlife. Which brings us to a final, really crucial question to chew on. How can we continue to balance deep-rooted local traditions with vital wildlife conservation? The story of Jatinga isn't just about some spooky bird mystery. It's a literal blueprint for how science, education, and true community engagement can transform local folklore into a massive ecotourism win. It honestly makes you wonder, what other wild environmental mysteries are out there right now, just waiting to be properly understood instead of feared? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep your curiosity alive.